Okay, good evening everybody, and thanks to each one of you for joining here. I have with me Andy Sailors, the Chief Business Development Officer at Compound Semiconductor Applications Catapult, and Sam Diarod from Innovate UK KTN, whom you probably have met last time. I'm also very pleased to have Dr. Mike Short, who is one of the panel speakers last time. Mike has decided to play a role on the other side of the fence today, but given that he's present here itself is a big achievement for each one of us. Today is obviously the second edition of Tech Tuesdays, and I'm very pleased to sort of say that for the people who were not there last time, it was a sort of a super successful launch. And I think a big round of applause is deserved by our partner, KLM Getz. We have James Cross here. All the tea and all the coffee, the beautiful room, and the dinner drinks afterwards is courtesy to KLM Getz. Thanks, James, once again.
We hope the tech works.
A bit about Tech Tuesdays for people who have just come in this time. Tech Tuesdays stems from the idea of building a community that ideates, nurtures, and then fosters a free-flow discussion of disruptive technologies which have the potential to impact 1 billion lives. In the process, it serves to contribute by forming a knowledge platform that disseminates information and builds a borderless hub which is accessible to tech innovators and enthusiasts, as well as startups and established companies. Tech Tuesdays, for all you know, is a monthly event which is going to take place on the first Tuesday of every month. We're going to be spending an hour discussing technology and disruptions and things around that. The next event is scheduled on the 7th of March, where FinTech is going to be the theme. Last but not the least, I would request each one of you to spread the good word in terms of social media presence. You can see our Twitter handles, you can see our LinkedIn presence, our website. Whatever you do, please tag us as Tech Tuesdays UK. And yes, of course, we have after the discussions, we have a video doc station wherein probably we'll take video bites from some of you. All these video bites will be sort of distributed across all our touch points. I now invite Andy and Simon to take on the stage. Thank you.
The tech is working so far, so that's definitely a promising start. Yeah, we don't need that, it's fine. That's fine. I haven't got any slides anyway, because if you ask me for some, I've forgotten them, so it's good. So.
Good afternoon, welcome everybody. Really pleased to be here with Simon. Perhaps we should introduce ourselves first.
Yep, so I'm Simon Yarwood. I'm from an organisation called Innovate UK KTN. As the name gives away at the start, we're part of the Innovate UK family. Broadly, that means we're here to help UK innovative companies with innovative ideas, develop how they're going to develop and deliver the next changing innovation. So as Sparsh was saying, this is about disruptive technology, so we cover everything from agriculture to net zero. That's the best I can get to say it. I know it's end, but it's close enough. The point is we're here to help the ecosystem on behalf of the funding agency. Innovate UK are the wallet, we're the Rolodex. And then if you want to have someone that can actually do something for you, we have the catapult, and that's my smooth segue over to Andy.
Thanks, Simon. So Andy Sellers, as Sapash has introduced me from the Compound Semiconductor Applications Catapult, we're a non-profit research and technology organisation established by Innovate UK to help companies develop advanced electronic products using compound semiconductors. There's actually 9 catapults in the UK, representing about £1 billion worth of investment by the UK government, all to do the similar thing. They're all helping companies develop advanced technology products, but in different spheres. So there's a manufacturing catapult, there's a cell and gene therapy catapult, looking at new cellular technologies, There's a satellite applications catapult looking at how you commercialise sort of downstream services from satellites. And my catapult specifically is looking at how companies can develop advanced electronic products using semiconductors. So this is the background. We work very closely with Innovate UK and KTN, and we're sort of very well connected into. We're non-profit, so we're very well connected into companies and academics and international.
I'd say so. The KTN, as it's part of this Innovate UK family, is not a profit-making business. I think that's the correct phrase for our legal status. So we help companies, we help innovators on behalf of the government. So we're not a consultancy that charges. Yeah, that's the really important thing whenever I go and talk to a company that says, how can you help me? I'm like, well, people, products and pounds, that's the core offering. But how we can do that is working with you and connecting you into the innovation space, whether it be a catapult or whether it be another company or an RTO or a university. And what I should have said, of course, what I actually do is I'm in the industrial technologies team, and my role centres mainly around computing software, energy efficiency driving of that. And then at the end I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work happening in the UK in the quantum computing space. But our main focus really is talking about the semiconductor space in the UK, because it's been an interesting area that a lot of people probably didn't know much about or realise how impactful it could be until a second-hand car cost more than a new car during lockdown, and that was basically your fault, wasn't it? Well, sorry, the supply chain's fault. Sorry, Andy.
Nice segue. Yeah. So it actually was the lack of a $30 chip that stopped people from shipping a $30,000 vehicle. And it's interesting when you look at semiconductors. What are semiconductors? They're advanced materials that form the critical part of electronics. Every electronic product uses semiconductors, but there are actually sort of 3 or 4 different types of semiconductors, so it's actually kind of quite a complex family tree. We've got silicon semiconductors, and they're the ones that predominantly run software and do some other sort of functions. There are some specialist semiconductors, like compound semiconductors, which is what my catapult is particularly involved in. They're generally, in the areas where they're good, they outperform silicon. And they outperform silicon in 3 areas: power, speed, and light. So if you've got an electric vehicle and you want it to go further, you use a compound semiconductor. It's more powerful, it's more power efficient. If you're doing high-speed data communication, 5G networks, 6G networks, satellite communications, you use a compound semiconductor. So it's this high speed, so power and speed. And the last one is light. If you want to emit light very effectively or detect light very effectively, you use compound semiconductors. So they won't replace silicon, they always complement silicon, but the two kind of work hand in hand. And then there's actually a third type as well, and that is the display on your phone is what's called an organic semiconductor. It's a large area semiconductor, so it's tailored to a specific application, if you like. But really what happened during with the supply chain crunch is a couple of things. To be honest, it had kind of been brewing for about 40 years in many ways. What happened, supply chains become very complex, but what really happened was companies started to specialise in certain parts of the supply chain. One country in particular, Taiwan, made a very strategic decision about 40 years ago that they were going to focus on cutting-edge silicon chips. That was going to be their focus. And they put a lot of government intervention in order to make that happen. And effectively now, something like 85% of the world's cutting-edge chips are fabricated in Taiwan. Now, once that had happened, they took the entire market. It's impossible for anybody else to compete in that space. So then other parts of the world started to look around and think, what are we going to focus on? The Netherlands had processing equipment. A company there called ASML, the largest, highest value company in the Netherlands. So they focused on processing equipment. And the UK then actually focused on design, and the US to focus on design. And all of a sudden you get this situation where specific countries are focusing on one part of the value chain and becoming extremely good at it. And that, in fact, that actually drove down costs and it drove up productivity at the expense of creating quite complex supply chains. So that sort of globalization and specialization has been happening for about 30 years. Certainly about 30 years. And then really so the sort of the underlying trends were there before the supply chain crunch. And then really what happened in COVID is everybody started using laptops a lot more, and they didn't really need, so the fabs kind of thought, oh, okay, there's a lot of money to be made out of these high-end chips, and all the fabs of, you know, factories where they make the chips, they started to focus on the high-end chips and started to deprioritize the lower value chips. And the automotive industry kind of operates a just-in-time purchasing. It's very efficient, it keeps their capital flows very good. And of course, the minute those chips stopped flowing, they couldn't complete the production of their vehicles. So all of a sudden, we had this kind of crazy supply chain crunch. There was another factor actually. There was a fab in Japan that went on fire. And when that happened, it just knocks out a certain percentage of the world's production. And these kind of things conflated to create a perfect storm. And as a result of that, all of a sudden, you couldn't ship a $30,000 car for the want of a $30 component. So really sort of quite, what it has done, and I'll hand back into Simon in a minute, what it has done is it's kind of refocused, it's made countries kind of focus on their resilience and where, you know, and sort of face up to this a little bit more, just face up to the fact that actually if you want indigenous industries, you have to have some mechanism to support them. And I know sort of Innovate UK and KTN have been looking very closely at sort of the supply chain and what sort of interventions and what have you. And
so I think the first thing I really knew about the problem was when I got a phone call from someone in a government department saying, "What do you know about UK semiconductor space?" I was like, "Not much. What am I going to have to learn and why?" And it just came down to, again, who are the players? Who do you know? So you've got people like IQE and others, and Silicon Vale, or whatever we're calling it. So there's a big focus in South Wales where the catapult is, and there's a good UK capability. But understanding where we sit, where do we have that supply chain? What can we do? And I think it was a really interesting conversation, as Andy said, where we spent years and years hyper-focused and specialised, and then realised that possibly some diversification may not be the worst idea possible, but diversification takes time and costs quite a lot of money. I do remember a conversation with someone where literally it was, how much does it cost to set up a fab? I was like, I've not got a clue. And in the end, I found an article about 2 weeks later. It said, it costs about £100 million, roughly. Yeah, this was proper finger in the air. And I sent it back to this person. I said, I wasn't sure how serious you were when you said to me, how much does it cost to set one of these up? And he said, that's a really good example, because it shows the problem. Because this article, written by a leading tech author, tech magazine online, was saying, if you had this, and possibly this, and if this condition was right, and the wind was blowing south-southeasterly, and you threw some ash into the wind, maybe it would cost about £100 million. That's not great for budgeting, I find, that kind of flexible parameters. So I think it really helped the UK understand in a time when things weren't quite as fast-paced in some cases due to COVID and lockdown, and it was a time that people could spend some time looking and reflecting on where we had capability and where we might want to expand in the future. And yeah, literally, I then noticed that people were complaining about cars on Facebook. And it was sort of a domino effect, really, of where we are. And I think that comes back to the UK ecosystem piece I was talking about earlier, where you have the people that do the catapults, they are the RTOs, they are the Fraunhofers, I think that's a fair description, of the UK. And they're really there to help deliver. But how do you know who's out there? And how do you know the people that might want to work with you, might want to collaborate with you? And that's where that Innovate UK family comes in. So say you have people like Innovate UK Edge and Innovate UK KTN who are there to help build those consortia. You know, looking outside of the UK as well, looking to Europe. There are still funds in Europe we can still tap into despite 2016 and all that jazz. But it's not a closed ecosystem still. And I think, again, this was highlighted when we became a little bit isolated as the rest of the world because it didn't leave its house for 6 months. And I think, how did you as the Catapult see this UK ecosystem developing in recent times now?
Yeah, good question. I think certainly we this kind of this supply chain crunch has put the spotlight on what each country can do, and certainly every country needs to play to its strengths, and that is where the UK is looking very closely at the moment. I think can you hear me? Well, I think certainly we identify in the silicon high end we are extremely good at design. So that is a strength that we will play to. The silicon high-end production, actually the estimates of £100 million to set up a fab are kind of not very close, if I'm honest.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
A high-end silicon fab, typically of the order of $5 billion, between $5 billion and $20 billion. That isn't the only problem about setting up a high-end fab. The electricity costs are phenomenal. They probably take about 3 or 4 years to come on stream because you need to get the purity up, and you need thousands of highly skilled engineers. And just to put this in context, Taiwan has the 4th cheapest electricity on the planet. I think it's 65 or 70% of school leavers go on to study science degrees at university, and they have a skills shortage. So when you have a country which has really focused on being able to do high-end semiconductors, and they're actually trying to get a little bit tricky. These are kind of fundamental barriers to kind of setting up this sort of industry. So I think where the UK has its strengths, as I say, in the design of silicon, we're very good. In compound semiconductors, so these are the things which are fundamentally good for electric vehicles and telecom networks, and some other sort of high-end areas like quantum and some defence applications. The UK is very good at the design, the academic, and also some fabrication of those semiconductors. So that's an area where we think we ought to focus. It's an area which is actually growing. Silicon is growing at about 3 to 4% CAGR. Compound semiconductors at about 12 to 15% CAGR. So it's an area where it's starting off from a much lower base, if I'm honest, but it's an area where we think we've got a UK capability that we ought to, we ought to nurture and grow and capitalise on. I think the other kind of we talk about sort of ecosystems. So the UK ecosystem is we're aware of the key elements of the UK ecosystem. I think the other thing is international partnerships. So there are quite a lot of things that we just cannot do on our own. And this is, I mentioned $5 billion to set up a fab, and it's pretty unlikely the UK government is gonna invest in something like that. And to be quite honest, I think it's slightly crazy as well. But there are other things happening around the world. So US is investing $52 billion in starting to try and reshore some of its capability. It has progressively offshored from the US to Taiwan, as I say, into the Far East. So they're going to try and reshore some of that. The EU has a similar sort of investment profile, something like 43 billion euros, I think, to try and do something not dissimilar to what the US are doing. But also, very interestingly, the other areas where there are large investments, the Chinese, I believe, is $143 billion they're investing. India, very interestingly, investing something like equivalent to $10 billion, and looking at, in silicon fabrication, looking at what I would call the sweet spot. So they're not going for the high-end, critical, really difficult things to manufacture, which would cost $5 billion to set up a fab. They're going for a mid-range fab, which is actually where the highest volume of chips are, but they're not right at the cutting edge. And I think that's a sensible policy. It's also there's a large domestic market in India which would drive the demand for those chips. And when we talk about sort of ecosystems and having partnerships, I think it's that would be one really powerful partnership. It's an area where the UK wouldn't focus, and it's an area where India would. So there's some complementarities where I think we could work together.
Yeah. So I think one of the big problems with the space, as we said, is it's costly space to operate within. Partly because it's complexity, not just the materials. It's a material space, but also a costly space to operate in. Now, something that was sort of announced in December, so it's kind of in the public domain, but I want to talk about briefly, is government funding. Now, as far as I know, that didn't change this morning. So you'll be pleased to know. But coming in early March, there should actually be circa £15 million coming out of the UK government, focused on looking at helping the supply chain. So focusing on what those challenges were that the UK and globally were faced, and looking at how the UK can better be more resilient, I should say, sorry. So yeah, it's not fully signed off yet, which is why I can't share things in much detail, but the unsigned off version is circa £15 million, a piece on skills development. So as Andy was saying, you're in that Taiwan situation where they've got an amazing track and they've still got a problem. There is a long established issue with STEM STEAM in the UK, and we can look to develop that further, but this is a particular program looking at helping that skills issue in the semiconductor supply chain, and also looking at technology and how they can help people with scale up. So there should be a public briefing and announcement happening in the next 2 or 3 weeks on this. So beginning of March is the last thing I was told, when it will be public, and then when it is public, the KTN will be running a briefing event. So that will be an online event where people can dial in over a Zoom, ask some questions and get some answers hopefully on what's in and out of scope. But at the moment, the things I can say is definitely as a result of what was witnessed and those conversations that people from different parts of government were having with Andy and with my colleagues, because I will definitely say I'm not the guy that does the semiconductors normally. There's a lovely chap called Paul and a lovely chap called Sven. And they work tirelessly with a lot of different parts of government to help fill in that knowledge gap. So I think there was definitely a knowledge gap of what our capability was. Not only were we not as capable as we might want to have been, we weren't as knowledgeable of that capability. I think it's fair to say. So yes, that money should be coming soon. It will be probably done within a year. So probably looking at short-term high impact, mid-range cash values if you think about Innovate UK funding normally. But again, we don't have a full brief yet, so unfortunately I can't give you much more detail. But it's a positive message that I literally got on email this morning from a colleague following a soft launch in December. I think that is where places like the catapults and the KTN can again play a role, where if people are looking for collaborative work on these sorts of funding pools, say the catapults have the equipment and the KTN has the knowledge to be able to connect people. So I really hope we're going to see some positive things coming out of this. Again, it's small, I will say, my boss probably wouldn't like me saying it, but I will say 15 million-ish is not massive amounts of money given what we were talking about, but if used correctly, it can have the advantage of making an impact for individuals and smaller companies, and being about supply chain enablement piece, hopefully it can have that positive impact for the UK. Now these sorts of funds are available to any UK business normally. So again, we're expecting to follow those normal rules, but it says any UK business, and it has to be a UK registered business. But usually that business doesn't actually have to have a UK trading history. So new companies can work on this. So I've worked with Sebastian Technoplat in the past with companies wanting to come over to the UK and look towards funding opportunities. So the UK, I think, is a very dynamic place in terms of that, where the government is willing to invest in startups that don't have that proven track record. And one of the roles of public funding is to help de-risk a startup with a new idea that could go horribly wrong, and wish to have the opportunity to try something out without all of their money being spent on something that didn't quite work. So it's a very stringent process. Lots of people look at the ideas, and a lot of ideas never make it to the drawing board of funding, but it is a brilliant process as far as I'm concerned that allows some of that risk to be borne by that investment of public funds.
You had a question?
Yeah, I have.
Just introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Prithvish.
Mhm.
I'm part of Tata,
Mhm.
Tata Consultancy Services. So I'm trying to understand how did you generate this idea actually? What were your motivations or inspiration, okay, that you'll get into this disruptive technologies? Because the reason I'm asking that basically that where from I can get that, okay, this technology or that this innovation will be disruptive. Okay, so if you can let us know your motivation and inspiration, because during pandemic,
Yeah.
okay, so supply chain disruption was there, okay, and chip manufacturing is one of the items which got impacted. Similarly, my question is that why not drug development? Why you moved into, or rather, why you ventured into chip manufacturing? So if you can let us know your inspiration and
I can probably answer, give an answer to both those. I think so. On the drug manufacturing, there's a couple of questions here. It's what are the indigenous strengths of the UK? So we look across the UK to see where our indigenous strengths are, and the government interventions, as Simon has mentioned, there are a number of different types of government interventions. Sometimes the government provides a grant to have a company advance technology, and the catapult is another form of government intervention. We have people, we have laboratories, we have scientists that can help make those prototypes. Now, you put in a government intervention where you have a nascent industry, where you can accelerate an industry, you can de-risk it, you can help it to grow a lot faster. You wouldn't put an intervention into a place where you have no industry at all. It would be impossible to start something up from scratch. So there is a cell and gene therapy catapult, and it is actually looking at advancing cellular therapies and how they differ from traditional therapies. I'm not an expert, but I actually chair a cross-catapult group, so I work with all the CTOs across the other catapults. So I've got a little bit of insight. But how these cellular therapies differ is most medicines are about 30% efficacy, and that means when you give a medicine out to the population, 30% of the population respond very well to the medicine, perhaps another 30% have a modest response, and another 30% don't have very much response at all. Now, some treatments, that just isn't good enough. So what this catapult is helping companies do cell therapy treatments. And what they do is they actually extract the cells from the body, and they treat those cells specifically. There's a type of cell called a T cell, and they treat those cells, and then they grow them in a reaction chamber, and they inject them back into the body. It's a highly targeted medical treatment, typically costing about £1 million per treatment. So it's extraordinarily expensive, but extraordinarily well targeted and very, very high efficacy. So you asked about sort of drugs and that sort of thing. That is one area where the UK sees itself as being preeminently expert. There's a lot of research which has come out of our universities, a lot of startups, and that's why the government created a cell and gene therapy catapult to help grow that industry. So these particular areas are where there's already capability in universities and in startups and in some larger companies. The other sort of thing you were asking there is about sort of how do we spot the ideas and where do the inspirations come from? And some of that is it's kind of road mapping, and it's kind of looking into the future. It's a little bit of sort of future gazing and technology gazing. And that's kind of what Catapults and KTN and Innovate UK are here to do. And we do that in a number of different ways. So we can hold round tables where we bring together groups of experts. And believe it or not, the collective wisdom of an expert is a group of experts is infinitely better than the expertise of one expert, because people sort of they piece together the jigsaw puzzle in a way that one person would never be able to do. So you're able to generate these sort of roadmaps. You're able to look at, so for example, we look at some of the future trends. So we might look at technological trends, societal trends, economic trends, and political trends. And in chips, the technological trends, everything is becoming more and more complex. Everything is having a chip in it. Things are starting to have artificial intelligence built into them. They're making their own decisions. So there's a massive drive in that direction. And that requires silicon chips, it requires better software, also requires compound semiconductors. Some of the social trends, our society is demanding kind of ubiquitous connectivity. People want to be connected. They want to have an instant connection to wherever they are to the internet. They want to have fast downloads. They want a reliable connection. So these are some of the societal trends. Also, people are becoming sort of more environmentally aware. So they're wanting to make sure that they're not damaging the environment in the way that they use their services. And an economic trend, the cost of energy and the security of energy is going up. So now we need to make things more energy efficient in order to make sure that we're not beholden to a carbon energy source. We need to find different energy sources. We need to what energy source we do have, we need to use more in a better way. And so all of these things are driving particular trends. And in compound semiconductors, I've got 2 brochures here, I've got left a couple around the room. One of them is about net zero, which is all about the trends of how we're making things more energy efficient and how compound semiconductors do that. And the other one is called Future Telecom Networks, and that's about connectivity and ubiquitous connectivity and how compound semiconductors will play a role in those. So we do quite a lot of this future gazing and working very closely with Innovate UK and KTN to try and map and roadmap the future. And ultimately, that kind of influence is where they will put their funding. So they will say, okay, that's the direction. That is the future. Can we bring the future forward a little bit by putting some funding in? So sometimes the amount of money can, a small amount of money can actually have an enormous effect on an industry.
Yeah, I'd say so. A mechanism that KTN actually delivers for Innovate UK, it's had a few names over the years, but they're now called innovation networks. So I've run one on public or S1E use of the nationally funded HPC facilities. So David Willits invested £120 million back in 2012, 2011 into putting an HPC in lots of university basements. They wanted businesses to use them. So I ran a group based all on that. And that helped identify funding opportunities where people could get money to help pay for some of that runtime, where the universities could get money to get their kit upgraded. I run one on energy efficient computing, and that was working a lot with ARM and looking at how you could do low power more efficient. And of course they go hand in hand because high performance computing, that's very expensive, mainly because it's really inefficient and has old software a lot of the time. Yeah, there are systems running 30-year-old software in universities because that works. So there is an entirely new educational skills channel called the Research Software Engineer that didn't exist before UKRI and research councils and KTN brought together people who agreed we should probably have people better trained on writing new software. It's a lot more complicated than that, but that's kind of the conversation that James and I had. And there is now the RSE, the Research Software Engineer Association. They meet every year, hundreds of PhDs who are specialists in this area. That didn't even exist before the government asked us to look at what the weaknesses were and look where the potential value could be. So it's all about that engagement with the community, knowing who's out there, but asking opinions. And Innovate UK will often ask opinions of people, and they want that feedback to be able to tell them where they can direct things. So often it can be a private chat, or it can be a massive network, which is a multi-year program. So we have a new network on AI, and how AI is going to move to other sectors. We've had a big network on quantum, but all quantum sensing, quantum computing, quantum sensors for automotive vehicles to see around corners. At that point, I was just like, okay, that's fine. But yeah, so this is how the UK government knows what's going on, by being really well connected and understanding there's just not enough civil servants to do it, so they can reach out to these networks that are part or major funded by the government, so we can bring impartial advice to them. I think that's a really important thing, is the impartiality. By being a convener and by being not-for-profit organisations, we can bring an opinion to their door and say, this is an impartial opinion. This is someone, it might be, give me £500 million, it's sort of impartial, but it's well informed by 20 people getting together and agreeing that maybe this is the right way that we should do something. Does that help?
Thanks a lot.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions right at this moment in time?
So of course quantum has come up a few times.
Mm-hmm.
The progression of semiconductors, you mentioned complex or compound, and where do you see that spectrum? Where do you see quantum playing a more important role in the UK?
Sure, quantum playing an important role in the UK.
From a UK semiconductor industry perspective, and probably a second question was, I'm pretty layman in terms of understanding how big is the semiconductor industry? Because we're focusing on design, so in terms of GDP What's the number? How many people do we have in the UK in that space? Any idea?
Okay.
Just one second. Madhav, just introduce yourself, you can. Yeah.
I'm Madhav. I work for a company called Nastra, more on the supply chain finance side of things, but I think
I've got some statistics off the top of my head. So in semiconductor fabs, the UK's got around 25 semiconductor fabs of varying flavours. We've got 3 or 4 that do 1 billion chips a year, but they're very, very basic chips, if I'm honest, very, very basic silicon chips. But nevertheless, they do 1 billion chips a year. They sell for about a cent each, those chips. We have some compound semiconductor fabs. We've got one that does 5 million a week, 5 million compound semiconductor chips a week. A couple actually that do those sort of volumes. Semiconductors does tend to be a volume game. So the running costs for a fab, typically the electricity costs, typically are of the order of £1 million a month or more. The material costs tend not to be particularly expensive, and the processing tools are very expensive. So a high-end silicon processing tool might be $100 million, and a more basic processing tool or a compound semiconductor tool, they're not as expensive, maybe sort of $20 million. So still, sizable, but not of the order of 100 million. The running costs, as I say, so the fixed costs for a fab are very, very expensive. The variable costs are very low. So once you get through the break-even point, you become very profitable very quickly. So it really is a volume game. In terms of, so that's kind of a fab area. So some of those fabs employ typically 500 people. So not all of them. So that's kind of 20 times 400, 500 people. There's around 5,000 companies in the UK that design and manufacture electronic systems. About 90% of them are SME. UK tends to have a very long tail of SMEs, a very small number of large companies. I'm trying to think of the other questions. Oh, you were asked about quantum as well.
yeah, in terms of disruptive, because the topic is also
Yeah.
where do you see that?
So, in terms of quantum computing, then I think the UK, specifically quantum computing, general quantum, far too wibbly wobbly for me, I'm afraid. But in terms of quantum computing, then the UK has been funding this since about 2015. So there was a £300 million initial investment. We're now looking at around £1 billion. That 300 million was the single biggest public investment in disruptive technology. So going back to your question about what's a disruptive technology, at the time it was the single biggest investment by the UK government in a disruptive technology. So, and again, how we define disruptive is a whole other conversation, because I think there's literally a definition that people use for that one. But I think we can agree the chances of knocking down old encoding and protection on information that's been held safe for decades is going to be very disruptive if that happens. And again, there are several people which will tell you it will never happen. And there are lots of people who tell you, oh, it's going to happen next week. But they've been saying that for a decade. But yeah, so we're looking now roughly around £1 billion of public and industry contribute, so total investment in the UK. Now, the UK government, as of last year, I don't have any more up-to-date stats unfortunately, but it was the 5th largest public investment in quantum technology in the world. In terms of our research base, the focus is more at the moment on software over hardware. One would argue a bit cheaper, but that's a whole separate conversation, the perennial hardware versus software conversation. But we're, I think, second in the world in terms of reference publications on quantum technology and quantum computing. So we have a very high output of research, and we have a cluster of UK businesses that are focused on developing quantum algorithms. I think there's even a quantum as a cloud service currently available from a UK vendor where people can test out algorithms and ideas. But just to put an idea of the potential versus reality, currently it takes 10,000 qubits to make one stable qubit. If you have 500 stable qubits, the number of multi-point pieces is larger than the number of atoms in the observable universe. But we need 10,000 to make one. making 500. You see what I mean about the stories of, oh, next week we'll be breaking encryption. Maybe not. Maybe this is a longer tail. But I think the UK investment is definitely there. And I think it's what the UK can, sorry, not the UK, sorry, what the technology can unlock. And hopefully the UK can be at the forefront of some of that technology. And I wrote a little list, I knew I wouldn't remember what the things were, but some of the high level pieces. And this was a great one when I read about this. Logistic scheduling. Seems simple, but the example was if you have an oil tanker that's doing a journey from A to B, and the contract says it has to be here at a certain amount of time, but you discover a fluctuation in a market that's on the way, is the cost of the fuel to go there to do a small transaction can make the profit difference than going to there, but that's further away, but there's a bigger value there. And it's a variables game. Quantum isn't there to help volume and architecture get faster. It's not there to break Moore's law. It's to do the things that Moore's the volume architecture just goes, well, I can't do that. Crazy. And I think the really interesting one, it goes sort of associated to the cell and gene therapy, but off on the side, is something called computational chemistry. And this is where you're looking at, this could be a real game changer, where you're looking at chemistry on an atomic and molecular level, the interactions, which at the moment, current supercomputer architectures can do very minimal interactions because the complexity is so vast, or the length of time it would take, as it were. What it can deliver in a meaningful amount of time can scratch the surface a bit, but if you were able to actually have a quantum architecture, you could actually make a dent on solving some really challenging problems in chemistry. And this could open up a whole world of advantage to the UK.
May I just add to the answer a little bit?
Of course.
The KTN have a very good quantum technology directory,
Yep.
which is online, worth looking at. So if you're investigating the space, look at that directory. Secondly, the National Quantum Technology Programme, which I sit on, also runs an annual conference every November, and that showcase is very helpful to go and see. So keep an eye open for that National Quantum Technology Showcase in November.
Yeah, it was at the QE2 Centre, just around the corner from Westminster last year. And Innovate is actually in the middle of working out when and where they're going to hold it with the KTN, because the KTN helps deliver it. So Quantum is another one where we have an innovation network. So it's one of those pieces where we try to bring things together.
What would solve the signal failures in the UK?
That's someone else's job. That's not for us to.
Can I elaborate a little bit on the quantum stuff? I mean, I'm just kind of reflecting on the semiconductor industry in general. When it started, it was a massively disruptive technology. Nobody envisaged when the transistor was invented that it would be carrying these things around. It has just exceeded everybody's expectations. And I'm reliably informed that it's between 2012 and 2021, the market doubled in size. Between 2021 and 2030, it's expected to double again to be $1 trillion. So that this and that's a predominantly silicon market. So the semiconductor market has been very disruptive and kind of exceeded all expectations. I think it's pretty fair to say that quantum could be equally disruptive. It does such kind of weird and wonderful things that we can see some of the applications now, but we can't see all the applications. And it's like that when somebody invented the transistor. They could see some applications, but they couldn't envisage these sort of things. So and that kind of disruption is just kind of accelerating, if anything. And the relationship to compound semiconductors is that kind of nearly every quantum effect is created and observed using a compound semiconductor. So most of the quantum effects are using a single photon. So a compound semiconductor generates a single photon of light and observes a single photon of light. There are other ways in which you cool an atom to absolute zero and use a compound semiconductor laser to cool the atom. So there are lots of little bits where, in order to get these quantum effects, you have to do this using compound semiconductors. So that's kind of one of the sort of key growth areas we see.
I think something I should have added to Mike's comment about that directory. The reason the UK has done quite well, it is seen as the reason the UK has done quite well in the quantum space, is we also have a good capability in terms of cooling and vacuum technology, and those two things are essential when doing the hardware work. So, not everything can be done in a cloud system. You want to be developing your hardware architectures as well. And I think that struck to me as something I'd never considered really before looking at these areas. That we have that supply chain and we have that capability base within the UK. Great.
Hi.
Just passing the mic.
Hi, Shubhanga. I am an investor and advisor, and I think for this session, I'm more of a student, and the question is more of academic interest more than anything else. When I kind of think about semiconductor industry and a couple of my portfolio startups in the IoT space, back in India, I only know that there's a large chip shortage. To that extent is my understanding of semiconductors industry. However, on the other side, I also have been informed through podcasts that the use of rare earth materials and minerals in the chip manufacturing itself is fairly intense. I mean, there is quite a few, and most of these rare earth materials are in countries which are not so well represented in the Western ecosystem. I think my question stems from the fact that I think coming from the banking world, we talk a lot about how we can be more responsible as the banking financial services industry. I think I wanted to understand what is the chip manufacturing industry and the semiconductor industry doing to ensure that, I think responsible is a very kind of proxy that I'm trying to use to tackle some of the challenges that are there in the minerals and mining industry, which is very inherent to the supply chain. And if we are indeed going to grow 2x of where we are in the next 8 years, are there kind of top forums, etc., within the industry that are talking about this? Is a question really that I have.
That's a very good question. I think actually the key word is resilience, and it's kind of all economies are now, as a result of the COVID and as a result of the supply chain crunch, all economies are now looking at how to make themselves more resilient, and that is including looking at supply chains, looking at if they can repatriate some work back to their domestic markets, but they're also looking at the supply of particular elements, rare earth elements. Now, particularly in the silicon fabrication, it requires very pure hydrogen, and it also requires neon and palladium. And both of those metals, neon and palladium, predominantly were coming from Ukraine up until clearly 12 months ago. So there's been a sort of a look to see where the other supplies for those materials are. You mentioned rare earth elements, and they are used in trace elements in some semiconductors, but not, and sometimes they're used as catalysts as well. But they're normally used in some of the ancillary components. So the magnets use, neodymium and ytterbium and all these other sort of rare earth elements. And there are deposits of those in Australia. The largest deposits are in China. There are some deposits in North America. I've read today that India is now looking at some of its mines to see that there might be deposits of rare earth elements there as well. And clearly, as these things are becoming more critical, then it's the economics changes. So when you have a pure free market, people go for the cheapest. That's all they really care about. When you start to look at resilience, people then start to say, actually, we need, we might not be the cheapest, but without access to this stuff, we can't actually make the car. We can't make or we can't even defend ourselves. So there's a slightly different imperative that people are starting to look at for these rare elements. Some of the other materials, some of the other ancillary components do need some quite exotic materials like tantalum, which tend to be from some of the African states, and there is a kind of I know there are some ethical kind of dimensions to this. So some companies are taking a very ethical approach to where they buy their minerals from, partly because those states might be exploiting child labour and that sort of thing. So it's rising up the agenda in terms of visibility. And actually, we were talking about sort of doing round tables and things. And this time last year, I did some round tables, online round tables between the UK and India in terms of electric vehicles. And we had sort of 4 round tables looking at sort of different aspects of electric vehicles, but one of them was on sustainable manufacturing. And we had some brilliant contributions from a really bright sort of professor in one of the ISCs in India, really fantastic sort of thought process about how you reimagining the manufacturing process, and you so at the end of life you take away these sort of rare earth elements and reprocess them. There's some UK companies doing some work in this space.
Yeah, I'd say, funnily enough, literally got an email 2 weeks ago from a colleague saying, we have a company that I'd like to find out more about the circular economy and rare earth metals. Now, I'd say, what I find amusing about this was back in, remember my dates, 2011, 2012, the Royal Academy did a program called the Great Recovery. And that was about instilling, and it had went down to STEM in schools. But it was looking at the principles of can you circular economize these rare earth metals from electronics? And there was a few years ago there was a theory that by 2030 we'd literally run out of certain elements, there'd be no more smartphones. Things have changed, things have moved on, but at that point there seemed to be genuine concern that high-end electronics, not just phones, were literally going to run out of materials. And there are EU funds under, I've forgotten the name of the work programme, but in the current Horizon programme, there are a couple of strands that are looking at that circular economy and looking at materials. And most of the time it's about materials innovation on alternative materials. So as Andy was saying, new materials for compound semiconductors, etc. But there seems to be a trend now, not quite a trend, but something's happening more in our communities at least, is people understanding the opportunity of circular economy. So what can you drive? I'm not talking about cars now, but what behaviours can be driven, what manufacturing processes? So not just remanufacture. So remanufacture is another great thing, but in terms of this is recycle, break down and retrieve, but that encompasses design thinking. So if one was to not talk badly about certain American fruit-shaped device makers, when they created something completely destructible, if you wanted to change anything in it, as it were, that actually made recovery harder for certain things, not just for the user. So there are wider things that people wouldn't even consider, and this circular economy ecosystem is coming more, sort of had a bit of a renaissance or a start, and I think it's now having a bit of a renaissance where people realise it's costly to do and set up, but actually could deliver some benefits going forward. But it's that sort of chicken and egg, I think, really, of people experimenting with it.
It's the wind sector that is using most of the magnets, most of the rare earth magnets. It's the wind sector that are causing a big problem for that.
Yeah.
Power electronics.
If we could change DDPMGs for ferrous magnets, that would be a massive saver and would save the problem of rare earths.
Again, this is something that I have heard my colleagues that do our power electronics machines and drives say very similar things along the lines of, this is where we need rare earth magnets, this is what is problematic.
Gas
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah, absolutely. These things they're getting scaled up enormously to obviously to recover more and more energy.
Sure.
And one aspect of that is that the motors are getting bigger and the magnets are getting bigger. There's no doubt.
60 tons of magnet.
Yes. We need to all find a different technology, but I have, I know people have been looking at magnetic materials research for a long time, and I don't think it's really shifted. It's improved slightly. I don't think anybody's made a significant breakthrough where they've been able to remove the dependence on rare earth elements. Is my understanding. I think what is interesting about this is it's potentially a new growth market. So people are now looking at recovering materials from old hard drives, and also they are looking at the circular economy. How do you keep those materials in use? So it might be used in a wind turbine at one point, and then after that it might find a use somewhere else. It is driving a different type of behaviour. People are starting to work out how you actually monetize the waste effectively. Take the waste in as a stream and monetize it, and find new economic outputs for that waste, which is potentially another sort of disruptive technology,
Yeah.
you know, so it's another disruptive industry. One where the UK, I know Innovate UK have funded some programs in that area, and one where, again, it comes down to this resilience thing. If you're able to do that, you keep the materials within your economy. It does make you more resilient.
Yeah, and so unfortunately it can be quite costly to establish those principles
Exactly.
rather than make new. Any other questions? Oh, it's just in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name is Vijay. I'm one of the co-founders of a startup. We have our offices in Norwich, and you know, we are of course scattered around, working from home. But one of the questions I had really, you know, on what you were saying, which is an excellent presentation. What really came to mind was on this funding that you mentioned about,
Oh, yeah.
you know, the 15 million
Yeah.
funding. So on that, where is the focus? Is it towards disruptive technologies, or is it really design that will make existing technology run better? Because in my field, what I've seen is there is disruptive technology, which is great, which makes for great news, but it also means that quite often chucking up what you have, and you might have a lot of it. It's deployed across, you know, economies, across systems. So do you throw that out?
So-
And wouldn't you, sorry,
Yeah,
I'll
that's
just
right.
complete. Or do you come up with new design, new software, which makes that run better and run longer? So yeah, that was my
So, unfortunately, as it's not signed off, I can't actually say because they might change their mind. So the Innovate UK process, in amongst these four walls and Mike, is very much a case of we have an idea, this is what we want to fund, we have a skeleton of in and out of scope, which is your question just then. You know, until it's actually, the ink has dried, that could change.
Sure.
What I can say currently is it's more about helping the supply chain and its resilience. It's not, this particular piece is not about new technology innovation. This is more about helping businesses in the semiconductor supply chain, he says reading a bit of paper, make their manufacturing capability better and more resilient. So if you think about the amount of money we're talking about, this is not for brand new processes, not likely. But again, until it's printed and out in the world, I really can't say. But this is the current thinking, again, that was made public in December, that what they're really looking at is helping supply chains be resilient. So looking at improving current systems, not about creating brand new processes. Now, funny enough, there are other funding programs out there that will do you a £2 million grant at up to 70% in intervention over 24 months that you could throw an idea into the pot to, because it is scopeless. So it doesn't actually discriminate on what idea you want to do. It's the single most competitive product Innovate UK offer, and the percentage success rate is in low single digits. But that's because any idea can be put into there. So there are interventions. I just mentioned this one because it was a specific thing about the supply chain piece, and quite different to what they normally do. So yeah, often you'll find Innovate UK as the innovation funding agency giving about £1 billion a year out. So when most of that's matched, it's worth 1.6, maybe more, billion pounds to the UK economy over the last couple of years, each year. Often their focus is on make us the new next best thing. You know, it's not about iteration, it's about innovation, it's about
next time.
revolution, not evolution. That's the one I was trying to remember badly there. But yeah, this one is more about that helping solve an identified problem. I think that's probably fair to say. But again, it doesn't tell you exactly what everything is. It doesn't say there won't be other future things like you've got there. And again, if it's something that can be done for a few £1 million in a couple of years, there are other funding streams currently open and available that people can look towards.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
No, certainly. And that's not, sorry,
That's okay.
just to
Yeah.
tag into the question.
Sorry.
So when we talked about disruptive tech, a
Yeah.
few years ago, I read about this great wonder material called graphene. And
Vijay.
I didn't hear anything after that.
Mike.
Switch it on. Switch it on, yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. No problem. Sorry. Is that better? Am I audible?
No, you broke it.
I can hear you, but the mic doesn't. But
That's okay, go on, no problem.
from the diaphragm.
Yeah, so what I was asking is, about something like graphene,
Yeah.
which was developed in the UK, or discovered in the UK, and absolutely unique. And has that been applied? Has there been any kind of it squarely falls within the semiconductor arena, and there's great potential. People talked about it. Has the funding gone into that? Has it developed further?
I know about other applications of graphene, but actually the semiconductor one, not any experience of.
So there's a couple of spin-outs. There's one in particular based in Cambridge called Paragraph, which it was the process to manufacture graphene was discovered by Professor Sir Colin Humphreys. He's come up with, to my knowledge, with the only mechanism for scalable production of graphene in the world, is my understanding. And there's an enormous amount of IP tied up in this company, Paragraph. I've seen their VC figures, and I can't remember what they are, but I think it's something like £50 million over 3 rounds over the last 3 years. And they're rapidly scaling up. Now, what they're actually using graphene for is a 2-dimensional magnetic sensor. So it's effective that they're classifying it as a semiconductor. It is a 2-dimensional, it's a very pure, very precise magnetic sensor. And why that's useful is if you've got an electric motor with a neodymium magnet in it, and you want to measure the magnetic flux of the motor or the current going into it, you need a magnetic sensor. So these things that could be all over cars, all over wind turbines, etc., etc. Very large application. Very unique what they're able to do. Their sensors are the only ones which have found their way into the CERN, the particle accelerator at CERN. They're the only ones which are accurate enough to do that. So there are a few applications. There is actually a big research centre in Manchester. The Graphene something Innovation Centre, I can't remember what the E stands for, GEIC, Graphene Enterprise Innovation Centre. I can't remember what the E stands for, but it's similar to a catapult actually, specifically for the scale-up of graphene based in Manchester. So there are some products which have come out of that research for sure.
Yeah, so actually that, as soon as you said the name, I knew I recognised it. So Paragraph actually took part in another Innovate UK funding programme, worked with the National Physical Laboratory down in Teddington, and that was to show that their Hall sensor, the Hall effect sensor, could work in high radiation applications such as space. So took a direct idea, worked with part of the National Measurement Service, found brand new applications, and that ecosystem was all developed through that sort of Innovate UK family in interactions.
I'm Alex. I work in the fitness space, but I used to work in the offshore renewable sector up at the catapult up there. So know it very well, and I'm a big fan of the catapults and the KTM. I think what you do is a fantastic job. But there is a perception that Innovate UK funding is aimed at TRLs 1 to 5, and then you hit the sort of valley of death 6 to 8, and the funding for commercialisation of R&D and innovation is not quite as effective in the UK as perhaps R&D funding. Please dispel that thought. It's a perception, and it's certainly when in my previous job it was an idea that came around, and we had a £2 million Innovate UK grant, but it was aimed at TRL 1 to 5.
So I can't dispel that. So I deal in 4 to 7, or 3 to 7.
But not up to 9.
Innovate UK is 3 to 7. Innovate UK should not dabble in 1 to 2, not even 1 to 3 really. That's what UKRI and the Research Council are for.
I think we went from 3 to about 5.
So but that's their space. And I think at one point it was even written in a mission statement or something somewhere. There is a problem with funding higher level activity in terms of the state aid rules on what you are allowed to do. Now, this was literal EU legislation. Now, of course, I hear you say, well, we're not in the EU. We have adopted and maintained quite a bit of that legislation because it's sensible. It's a personal view, not the company's. But there are some things, there are some rules. So the Subsidy Control Act is now live, I think, or nearly live. That redefined, as we've left the EU, what the government was able to fund. Funding things higher up the TRL is complex because of problems of unfair competitor advantage, and there was literal EU legislation against or to try and control that previously. How it's working now, I'm not too sure, but you're right, in my limited experience, the government funding finishes around 7, but actually a catapult centre is beyond that. So it's just different mechanisms?
Yeah, we tend, I mean, we don't go right up to market, but we help companies develop advanced prototypes, which are kind of literally a skip and a jump away from market. And I can give 3 examples. We've got a £20 million, we finished a £20 million product to build a supply chain to develop the powertrain for a McLaren sports car, using silicon carbide from a semiconductor fab in Scotland. They made the semiconductors, we made the transistors, we packaged the transistors into an inverter, we made a prototype inverter for McLaren sports cars. You might say, why McLaren? It's because, partly because they were a small company, so it was quite an easier challenge, if you like, because it's not straight to volume. They wanted to be first to market with the most innovative technology, so that's why we did McLaren first. On the back of that project, we got a £30 million project to do something very similar for BMW. So doing a prototype inverter to drive a BMW Mini. So we're doing a proof of concept prototype that we're working with BMW that they can demonstrate. And once they've demonstrated it, they can then justify putting in the private sector investments to scale it up and take it to market. That's the bit that they're uncertain of. Once they've demonstrated it, they're happy to move ahead with it. And we've got about £40 million worth of projects working in telecoms, developing high efficiency wideband power amplifiers for the radio access network for base stations, again using UK semiconductors actually in this instance. So these are kind of quite close to market, that almost like a proof of concept, a demonstrator that somebody can then evaluate and take on. And just one kind of last little plug here. We've got sort of 2 articles, there's some copies here, there's 2 articles. So there's one article, Building Resilient Semiconductor Supply Chains, which kind of talks about those sort of things that we just mentioned, and a kind of a future-gazing one, which is kind of semiconductors for strategic advantage, which is kind of around this kind of resilience and looking at where the UK has specific capabilities and where we want to partner internationally.
I would say there are 2 products I would mention that Innovate UK have that are specifically for the later stage, for 8-9 full commercialisation. So there's one programme that I've been helping run for the last couple of years, so I can talk about it better than most. And that's the National Measurement Service one that I mentioned that Paragraph used. And that is, my thing does not work. That could be a product, a service or a process. Doesn't work how I want it to. We can't work out what the problem was. And one of my favourite stories was a company that had a reject rate on their production line, 20%. They could not work out why 20% product failed QC. Went through the programme, through test and measurement that no one else could do. They realised they had a 100% success rate, their QC was broken. They were rejecting good product. Yeah, it was a bit of an eye-opener apparently. I've always been asked not to be told who the company name is, because I don't want to give that out by accident, but that was a project. So this programme's been running since 2016. But it's small, it's fully funded, 50k, a couple of months will solve your problem. But if you've got something that isn't quite working, there are Innovate UK funding programmes out there. And another one that I'm a big fan of, but know much less about, is the Knowledge Transfer Partnership Programme, KTPs. There's something like, I want to say 400 KTPs open at the moment, which are, I think that number can't be right, but it is a vast number. So this is where a company says, I cannot solve my problem with what I'm doing currently. We don't have the scientists, the engineers, etc. and they work with a university who helps recruit a postgrad postdoc, embeds them into the university for 18 to 36 months, and the government actually pays part of that person's salary. So it is I'm not going to use the word cheap because that actually cheapens the program. It is a way to have subsidised access to very clever people, and they have access to the university that helps do the program. And there's a whole team of colleagues in KTN that help people apply for that program. But it is one of those things where you talk to someone, they go, they do what?
Can I have a chat afterwards?
Yeah, 100% you can. But yeah, but you are right. Classically, the majority of that billion is on make the new thing, not help you get a bit further. But you can also come and talk to KTN or Innovate UK or Catapults about who might want to invest in my idea to bridge that last gap. And that is a separate thing. I'm involved in a commercialisation program for academics currently, helping them develop a business idea with cutting-edge cybersecurity and IoT. So there are things that literally these guys are creating a product, and we're putting them in front of investors in a couple of weeks' time in a year-long program. So those things do exist, and if you can ask us, then we can tell you what they are.
Wonderful.
Well,
Sorry, can I?
yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
So just to let you know, we've got Sri Ranjani. She's the Secretary for Economic Affairs in the High Commission in India, in London. Given Andy, you're traveling to India sometime next week.
Yes.
Across multiple states. Maybe you can throw some light on what's your plans and any help.
Flying into New Delhi, one day New Delhi, one day Bengaluru, 3 days in Mumbai. Specifically interested in the Ministry for Electronics and Information Technology, Department of Telecoms when we're in New Delhi. Some of the companies that we're hoping to meet, L&T Tech, hopefully Tata CS while we're in Mumbai. Specifically kind of companies that are developing, where we think there's a synergy between Indian companies and UK companies. And I mentioned our kind of future telecom networks. The UK is very good at certain bits of this, but we don't have an OEM. But there are some very ambitious and fast-growing, very capable companies in India where we think a partnership would work really well. So they're the companies we're hoping to meet. Some maybe electric vehicle companies as well.
Yeah.
So I was there last year, actually. I went twice last year. So we're kind of following up on sort of last year's trip.
Okay, that's great. There are some really good companies in the EV sphere that are developing in India. In fact, some of them were even here during the London EV show. In fact, yeah. So we do have some lists. So if it be of any help, we can just catch up after this and
Great,
then
thank you.
you can share. Then that's it.
Wonderful. I think we have time for two more questions.
There's a gentleman at the back there.
Sudhanshu?
Yeah. So do you want to pass the microphone back?
Just passing that.
I'm loud enough. I hate.
Oh, please do that.
It's the
I'm Sudhanshu. I'm Sudhanshu, and I'm co-founder of a startup based out of Bangalore, India. When you talk about challenges and bottlenecks in supply chain, how big is the supply chain problem in terms of people or people supply chain? Given that you have a long tail of SMEs, as you said, people with the right skills, do you think? And given that the smaller SMEs might not be able to invest as much in the capability building of their people, is there a program through Innovate UK wherein SMEs can partner with certain companies to build their capabilities in people?
That's exactly what the KTP program's for. So,
Okay.
so with the KTP program, you get a KTA, a Knowledge Transfer Associate. So that's the postgrad, the postdoc. They work with you. There is no commitment, the really important bit I kind of forgot, sorry. There's no commitment to keep that person working for you. It is a fixed term contract. It is there for the delivery of solving that challenge. However, slightly cheeky, it is technically the most successful graduate recruitment program in the UK because of the number of people that then get hired and retained by the company they do the they do the KTP program with. But it's all about knowledge transfer. It's all about embedding that knowledge. It's not just having a grad. It's about embedding that knowledge into the business so the business can sustain themselves. But the business often, not always, often sees such a value in having someone that's been with them through the process that they will then join that company for a while and then move on. So yeah, it's a brilliant program. But I think going to the wider question, there is a skills issue. It is a big thing for the UK government, STEM. You know, it goes down to school programmes. It starts literally there, with people sometimes saying we don't have enough schools programmes, but there are entire membership organisations, Mike having been the past president of one, where they have their own schools programmes because they believe so much that science, engineering, technology, mathematics needs to be built up in that capability in the UK, and that's not just a UK thing. So,
yeah, absolutely. Don't know if I can add much to that. I think, I mean, you were mentioning sort of supply chain. I mean, the conventional crunch was kind of literally components in the supply chain, but the kind of pipeline of talent that needs to come through is clearly, I think actually it's affecting kind of most industrialized economies because of the you know, the requirements to be upskilled in certain disciplines, scientific and, you know, STEM disciplines. It is affecting kind of most advanced economies. The Catapult's actually doing a skills program as well. So we do have a skills program looking at how we help upskill people specifically in sort of semiconductor skills and telecom and engineering skills. So we're kind of looking at how we roll that out. So the Catapult network is doing that, in fact, and we've got pilots for it at the moment. Sort of looking at that process. So.
yeah.
Any other question? Yes, Panch.
So you talk about STEM. You talk about STEM, and I mean, yesterday, I'm Himanshu Vaishnapan. I'm a school teacher.
Yeah.
So I'm just building on what you're talking about. There's been some announcement about the apprenticeship week, and I'm just wondering. I mean, while we talk a lot about STEM, are there any apprenticeships which are being focused in that area? You know, I mean, where transistors and things, you know, all about telecoms and things are happening, because a lot of students who are in school are reluctant to take science. I'm a science teacher. They just run away from that because they find it just too beyond them.
Sure.
And the UK is losing a lot of talent in that way at the school level.
I'm not aware of specifics in the sort of STEM. It's getting a lot of focus out there, that's for sure. So, and I think it's, you know, as I say, it's not just UK, I think industrialised nations are starting to realise that there's an upskilling requirement. I can't think of specific, apart from your core, which might have a skills element.
Yeah, it does. But as I say, I think the UK moved away from targeted apprenticeships in certain areas and moved to a wider, encouraging. I mean, this happened sort of whilst I was at school, to be honest, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And we moved more to a general, the principle is a solid one, we should encourage it across industry sectors. So I'm not really aware of anything specifically targeted in terms of the apprenticeship piece. But yeah, the new apprenticeship scheme, which is sort of like the modern apprenticeship that some of us remember, was a programme to try and increase that because the government saw there was an opportunity to have a product that didn't fit people with a classical university path, and that product had waned a little bit, so they increased their focus on those. And of course you've got I'm going to get the name wrong now, the T-levels are now, again, the new programme. They still have the Qs, the VQs as it were. So I think there's a definite focus from the UK government on wanting to encourage people to consider not just classical linear education, and a skills-based element is very important. And of course you've all those government drives for reskilling as well. Whatever you might think about the advertising campaigns, but you know, move into a different area, try something. These are areas where the UK wants to increase its capability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions from anybody? Good. Before I really get on out there and thank everyone out here, Mike, sorry, any note from your side? It will be good to sort of have your thoughts.
Well, I would say simply thank you to the speakers for being very eloquent and answering the questions. I think there's certain things that are done from central government, things that are done from regional government, and there are some things that are done from Innovate UK, and there are some things that are done from the catapults and the KTN. So we need to have a layered approach. to your question, sir, earlier on about priorities, I think government sets high-level priorities for things where it sees a problem. That could be in drugs or it could be in chips, but it sets high-level priorities first. And the problem we saw with drugs was actually more the supply chain of drugs rather than just the manufacturing of the drugs. The problem we saw in chips was also the supply chain of chips, and we said, where can we make a difference? And Andy's very eloquently talked about the design of chips. I would also say that some of the issues around TRL levels, which are a specialist art when it comes to defining the TRL levels, I've been on the board for Innovate UK for the last 4 years, and I can assure you, I would not have been on that board if we hadn't worked on better downstreaming from the research community through the innovation community through to the business community. And we wouldn't have signed off things which had state aid, which could be investigated. You know, if anything, slapped risk, board at risk. So why would you do anything that works against state aid? We've had to face the challenges that Simon referred to about no longer being part of the European Union programme fully, so we are not fully accepted within Horizon Europe. Those negotiations are continuing. We had said originally we'll be part of Horizon Europe. That said, between the UK and India, there's a lot of scope for collaboration. And I spoke with you at the Indian High Commission, I think it was only last week. There's a lot of scope for exchanges of talent, a lot of scope for exchanges of ideas. When I talk to my telecoms industry, you know, some of the lessons we can take from the 5G experience in the UK into India with less 5G experience, there's some evidence there. Similarly, if we take some evidence from the drug industry or pharmaceutical industry, there's some evidence there where we might be a bit better on design, but you are certainly much better on manufacturing. Not all drugs. I mean, certainly vaccines are a bit more challenging than maybe drugs. So I think there's a lot we can do together. But I think I applaud also Tech Tuesday for hosting these events and for the host as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If we can keep working on it, we can collaborate better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, it's Thanksgiving time, I guess. So first of all, obviously, thanks to the host, Kellen Gates, once again for hosting us. Thanks to our speakers, Simon and Andy. I haven't met Andy. This is the first time I'm meeting Andy. I just made a call to him and say, look, this is what we're doing. And I guess I was persuasive enough to convince him, and he just came on board. Simon, I've been knowing him for almost a decade now. He's someone who he's given me the liberty to call him at 12 a.m. at night, and he takes a call. Guess what? Simon has been part of my journey for the last 1 decade now, and he's been a mentor at Technoplat. And I don't know if you noticed, if you heard correctly, he obviously helped a lot of our cohorts for the Innovate UK funding. It's not an easy thing, believe you me. For a lot of startups who are here from India, I'm sure some point of time in their life, they would like to go for Innovate UK funding. It's not an easy task. Between me and him, we exchanged close to about 7 or 8 mails just on the proposal. And that's not all. We said we have multiple Zoom calls. There's just one proposal. So yes, if you really want to sort of go for Innovate UK funding, focus on your strategy and stuff, and I'm sure things will work out. Thanks to Mike for adding the bet. You should keep coming back to our Tech Tuesdays every month. And thanks to wonderful guests. I know there's a bit of noise happening on the left-hand side of your, but that's just the drinks getting served. But I guess it's time for drinks anyway. Thanks once again to each of you. Next event happening on the 7th of March. The theme is FinTech. And please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter and any other social media. We'll let you know who the speakers are. Yeah, please. So thank you and enjoy the evening.